She didn't scream when they dragged her through the snow. That silence, the kind that made the horses stamp and the preacher look away, was louder than any cry for help. Clara Morgan's bare feet left red trails in the white powder, her wrists bound with frozen rope, her thin dress soaked through with ice and blood. They called her the cursed widow, and today, the town of Silver Creek decided she'd brought enough bad luck upon them all. Subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey to the very end. Comment your city below so we can see how far her story has traveled. The rope bit into Clara Morgan's wrists as Jeb Hawkins yanked her forward. She stumbled, her knees hitting the frozen ground, but she didn't cry out. She'd learned months ago that crying only made them meaner. "Get up," Hawkins spat, jerking the rope. "Ain't got all day to deal with your kind." Clara pushed herself to her feet. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. The thin dress she wore, the only one she owned, now clung to her body like a second skin of ice. She could feel the townspeople watching from their windows, their breath fogging the glass. But not one of them came out. Not one of them said a word. "Where you taking her?" someone called from the general store porch. "Edge of town?" Hawkins answered without stopping. Let the winter finish what should have been done months ago. Clara's heart seized, but she kept walking. What choice did she have? The rope around her wrists connected to Hawkins's saddle horn, and his horse showed no signs of slowing. "Please," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken since they'd pulled her from behind the livery stable where she'd been sleeping. "Please, I'll leave. Just give me until morning. I'll walk to the next town and never come back." Hawkins laughed, a cold, ugly sound that matched the wind cutting through her bones. "You had your chance to leave, Mrs. Morgan. Should have gone when your husband did. Now you're the town's problem, and we're solving it our way." Behind them, Clara heard footsteps crunching in the snow. More men joining, she figured. More witnesses to her humiliation, her death. She thought of her son, little James with his father's dark hair and her own gray eyes. 3 years old when the fire took him. She'd tried to save him. God knows she'd tried, but the flames had been too fast, too hungry. She'd burned her hands, pulling at the door that wouldn't open, screamed until her voice gave out. And Walter had blamed her. Her husband had stood in the ashes of their home, looked at her bandaged hands, and said the words that had killed something inside her long before this town decided to finish the job. You should have been watching him. 6 months later, Walter left, took what little money they had, and disappeared, leaving her with nothing but a dead child's memory and a town that had decided she was cursed. "Hold up there, Jeb." The new voice made Hawkins stop. Clara looked up through the hair that had fallen across her face, tangled, dirty, frozen at the ends, and saw Sheriff Tom Bassett approaching. For one desperate moment, hope flickered in her chest. "Sheriff," she breathed. "Please." "Now, Jeb," the sheriff said, ignoring her completely. "You sure about this winter's harsh this year? She won't last the night out there." "That's the point, Tom." The sheriff nodded slowly, as if Hawkins had made a reasonable argument about the weather. "Suppose you're right. Just wanted to make sure we're all in agreement." The hope in Clara's chest died as quickly as it had sparked. "We are," Hawkins confirmed. "Judge Blackwood himself gave the order. Said she's been a burden on this town long enough. Said her kind brings nothing but trouble." Clara wanted to laugh at that. Her kind. As if being a widow was a disease. As if losing everything, her child, her husband, her home, was somehow contagious. But she didn't laugh. She didn't have the strength. "Well then," the sheriff said, tipping his hat, "carry on. I'll let the judge know it's been handled." They continued down the main street of Silver Creek, Colorado. Clara had arrived here 2 years ago as a new bride full of hope and dreams. She'd walked this same street on her husband's arm, nodding to shopkeepers, imagining the life they'd build. Now she walked it as a ghost, a woman already dead in the eyes of everyone who watched. The edge of town approached too quickly. The last buildings gave way to open prairie white and endless stretching toward mountains that looked like teeth against the gray sky. The wind hit harder here, nothing to block it, and Clara felt her body begin to shake uncontrollably. "This'll do," Hawkins announced, pulling his horse to a stop. He dismounted and walked toward her, knife in hand. For a wild second, Clara thought he meant to kill her outright, that maybe that would be a mercy, but he only cut the rope from his saddle horn. "You're free to go," he said with a cruel smile. "Anywhere but back to town. We see you again, we won't be so kind." Clara looked at the rope still binding her wrists, then at the empty prairie before her. Snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes that blurred the horizon. "My hands," she said. "Please, at least untie my hands." Hawkins was already mounting his horse. "Should have thought about that before you cursed this town witch." He turned and rode away without looking back. The other men followed, their laughter carried on the wind like breaking glass. Clara stood alone in the snow, watching them go, watching her last connection to shelter and warmth disappear down the road. She should move, she knew that. Standing still in this cold was death, slow and certain. But her legs wouldn't obey. Her body had gone beyond cold into something else entirely, a numbness that felt almost peaceful. Maybe this was how it was supposed to end. Maybe this was what she deserved for not saving James, for not being fast enough, strong enough, good enough. She sank to her knees in the snow. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one. To James. To whatever God might still be listening. "I'm so sorry." The snow fell harder. The wind howled. And Clara Morgan closed her eyes, ready for the darkness to take her. She didn't know how long she'd been kneeling there when she heard them. Voices, small voices cutting through the wind like bells. "Ruth, look over there. I see her, Lily. I see her." Clara forced her eyes open. Through the curtain of snow, she saw two small figures running toward her children, bundled in coats, too big for their bodies. Scarves wrapped around their faces until only their eyes showed. Ma'am, can you hear me?" A girl's face appeared before her. 7 years old, maybe 8, with dark hair escaping from under her wool cap and eyes that seemed too old for her small face. "She's freezing, Ruth. Look at her hands." "I know. Help me get her up." Small hands grabbed Clara's arms, pulling with surprising strength. Clara tried to help, tried to stand, but her legs had stopped working entirely. "She's too heavy," the first girl, Lily, Clara remembered, said with frustration. "We ain't leaving her," the other one replied fiercely. "You hear me, Lily? We ain't leaving her here to die." "I didn't say we should. I said she's too heavy. We need Uncle Daniel." The girl called Ruth looked back toward the road, then at Clara, then at the falling snow that was already beginning to cover them all. "You stay with her," Ruth decided. "I'll run back and get him. But stay with her, Lily. Keep her awake. Don't let her sleep." Ruth took off running, her small form disappearing into the white world within seconds. Lily knelt beside Clara, her mittened hands patting Clara's cheeks. Hey, lady. You gotta stay awake, okay? My sister's getting help. You just gotta stay awake." Clara tried to focus on the child's face, but everything was blurring at the edges. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "Why are you helping me?" Lily's expression shifted into something Clara couldn't quite read. Something knowing despite her young age. "'Cause Ruth said you was coming," the girl answered matter-of-factly. "She saw you in her dream 3 nights ago. Said a lady with sad eyes would need us, and we had to be ready." Clara wanted to ask what that meant, but her thoughts were scattering like snow in the wind. "My son," she murmured instead. "I had a son. His name was James." Lily's hand stilled on Clara's cheek. "I know," the girl whispered. "Ruth knows about him too. She says he's okay now. She says he's been waiting for you to be okay too." Tears froze on Clara's lashes before they could fall. "That's not possible. You couldn't know. Lots of things ain't possible. Lily said with the simple certainty of childhood. Don't mean they ain't true. The sound of hoofbeats broke through the wind. Clara turned her head slowly, painfully, and saw a horse approaching at full gallop, a man's dark form hunched against the storm. Behind him, Ruth clung to his back, her small arms wrapped tight around his waist. The man pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind, and something else, something that looked like old pain. She's alive, he asked, his voice deep and rough. Barely, Lily answered. She keeps trying to sleep. The man knelt beside Clara, and she found herself looking into eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue, almost gray, with a sharpness that seemed to see straight through her. Ma'am, he said, I'm going to pick you up now. It might hurt, but we need to get you warm. Clara managed the smallest nod. His arms went around her, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The movement sent pain shooting through her frozen limbs, and she couldn't hold back a cry. I know, he said quietly. I know it hurts. Just hold on. He carried her to his horse, somehow managing to mount while still holding her. She felt Ruth settle behind him, felt Lily being pulled up by her sister. And then they were moving the horse's gait surprisingly smooth despite the snow. What's your name? The man asked, his voice close to her ear. Clara? She managed through chattering teeth. Clara Morgan? Daniel Cole, he replied. These are my nieces Ruth and Lily. You're gonna be okay, Mrs. Morgan. We've got you now. We've got you now. When was the last time anyone had said those words to her? When was the last time anyone had cared whether she lived or died? Why? She asked the same question she'd asked the child. Daniel Cole didn't answer immediately. His arms tightened slightly around her, adjusting his grip as the horse navigated a drift. Because my nieces said you needed help, he finally said. And in my experience, those girls are never wrong about things like that. Clara wanted to ask more. Wanted to understand why two children she'd never met had been expecting her, had dreamed of her, had run out into a blizzard to save her life. But the warmth seeping from Daniel Cole's body into hers was doing something strange. It was making her feel safe. Safe enough to let go. Stay awake. Ruth's voice came from behind her. Not much farther, but you gotta stay awake. Talking helps, Lily added. Tell us something. Anything. Clara searched her fading mind for something to say, something to hold on to. I lost my son, she heard herself whisper. 3 months ago. Fire. I couldn't save him. The silence that followed was different from the silence of judgment she'd grown used to. This silence felt like listening. I'm sorry, Daniel said, and there was something in his voice, a recognition, an understanding that made Clara look up at his face, despite the effort it cost her. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. I know loss, he confirmed. Different kind, but I know how it eats at you. The town said I was cursed, said I brought death with me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Town's full of fools who need someone to blame when things go wrong. Easier than admitting the world's just hard sometimes. They dragged me out here to die. I figured as much when Ruth came running in screaming that we had to find you. Clara tried to process this, a child screaming for a stranger's life, a man riding into a blizzard without question, but it didn't fit anything she understood about how the world worked. I don't understand, she admitted. You don't have to, Lily said from behind. Not yet. You just gotta get warm first. Understanding comes later. The horse crested a small hill, and through the falling snow, Clara glimpsed a cabin. Small, sturdy, with smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. It wasn't much, nothing like the house she'd lost, but right now, it looked like the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Almost there, Daniel said. You're doing good, Mrs. Morgan. Just a little further. They reached the cabin, and Daniel dismounted carefully, still holding Clara in his arms. Ruth scrambled down to open the door, while Lily ran ahead to stoke the fire. The warmth that hit Clara when they crossed the threshold was almost painful. Her skin burned her fingers and toes screaming back to life, and she couldn't stop the tears that finally fell. Daniel laid her on a small bed near the hearth, pulling quilts over her shaking body. The girls moved around him with practiced efficiency, Ruth heating water, Lily gathering extra blankets. "We need to get those wet clothes off her," Ruth announced with a maturity that seemed impossible for her age. "Uncle Daniel, go take care of the horse. We'll handle this." Daniel hesitated, looking down at Clara with concern etched across his weathered face. "Go on," Ruth insisted. "Ain't proper for you to be here anyway. We know what to do." "You sure?" "Mama taught us remember before she—" Ruth stopped, swallowed, and lifted her chin. "We remember everything she taught us." Something passed across Daniel's face. Grief, pride, love, all tangled together in a single expression that Clara recognized intimately. "Call if you need me," he said, then looked directly at Clara. "You're safe here, Mrs. Morgan. Whatever happened out there, whoever did it, they can't touch you here. You understand?" Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure she did understand. Not any of it. Daniel left, closing the door firmly behind him, and suddenly Clara was alone with two little girls who had run into a blizzard to save her life. "Arms up," Ruth instructed gently. "Lily, hand me that nightgown, the blue one Mama made." Lily paused. "That was Mama's." "I know, but this lady needs it more than the trunk does right now." The girls helped Clara out of her frozen dress with careful, practiced hands. They wrapped her in warm cotton that smelled faintly of lavender, then tucked the quilts tight around her trembling body. "Drink this," Ruth ordered, pressing a cup of warm broth to Clara's lips. "Slowly. Your stomach ain't used to anything hot yet." Clara sipped, tasting salt and onion, and something deeper care maybe. The simple care of people who wanted her to live. "Why?" she asked again, the question that wouldn't stop circling in her frozen mind. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Ruth sat on the edge of the bed, her small face serious in the firelight. "3 nights ago," the girl said quietly, "I dreamed about a lady in the snow. She had sad eyes and burned hands, and she was crying for a little boy she couldn't reach." Clara's breath caught. Her hands, the scars from trying to open the door, were hidden under the quilts, but this child couldn't know about them, couldn't know about James. "In my dream," Ruth continued, "the lady stopped crying when we found her, and a little boy with dark hair smiled at me and said, 'Tell her it wasn't her fault. Tell her she can stop carrying it now.'" Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, hot and fast and impossible to stop. "That's not, you couldn't—" "I don't know how I know things," Ruth admitted. "Mama was the same way before she died. She told me once that some folks are born with thin walls between this world and the next. She said it was a gift, but it felt more like a burden sometimes." "Our Mama died having us," Lily added softly from her position by the fire. "Ruth was born first healthy and screaming, but I got stuck, and by the time Uncle Daniel's friend pulled me out, Mama was gone." Clara looked at the smaller twin, seeing now what she hadn't noticed before: a slight pallor to the child's skin, a careful quality to her movements, as if conserving energy. "Lily's heart don't work quite right," Ruth explained, following Clara's gaze. "Doctor says she's fragile, but she ain't weak. There's a difference." "There is," Clara agreed, remembering how she'd knelt in the ashes of her home, how the townspeople had called her weak when she'd really just been broken. "You ain't weak either," Ruth said, as if reading her thoughts. "You're just lost. There's a difference in that, too." The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air, and Daniel Cole stamping snow from his boots. He'd removed his heavy coat, and Clara could see he was leaner than she'd first thought strong, but in a wiry, weathered way that spoke of hard work and harder years. "Horse is settled," he announced. "How's she doing?" "Better," Ruth reported, the shivering slowing down. Daniel approached the bed, his blue-gray eyes assessing Clara with that same piercing directness. "You'll be staying here," he said. It wasn't a question or an offer, it was a statement of fact. Through the winter at least. Can't send anyone back out in this. Clara opened her mouth to protest. She had nothing to offer. No way to repay such kindness. No right to burden a stranger's household. But Daniel held up a hand. Before you argue, he continued, understand something. Those two girls have been saying for 3 days that someone was coming. Someone who needed us. I've learned not to argue when Ruth gets her feelings about things. But the town, Silver Creek. Daniel's expression hardened. Judge Blackwood's been trying to run me off this land for 2 years. Says there's something valuable under it, though I ain't found anything but water and rock. Whatever he told them about you, whatever they did. His eyes dropped to her rope-burned wrists. That's between you and them. Here you're just a woman who needs help. That clear? Clara swallowed past the tightness in her throat. Clear. Good. Girls, time for bed. I'll sit up with Mrs. Morgan, make sure the fire keeps. Clara, she corrected softly. Please. Mrs. Morgan was... She stopped, unable to finish. Daniel nodded once. Clara, then, get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure the rest out. Ruth and Lily retreated to a small room off the main cabin, but Ruth paused at the doorway. He won't hurt you, she said, her young voice carrying absolute certainty. In case you was wondering, Uncle Daniel's the safest person I know. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. Daniel settled into a chair near the hearth, far enough from Clara's bed to be proper, but close enough to reach her if needed. He didn't speak, didn't try to fill the silence with questions or explanations. He just sat there, solid and steady, a guardian against the storm raging outside. Clara watched the firelight play across his features. The strong jaw, the premature lines around his eyes, the way his hands rested on his knees, capable and still. You asked why? He said quietly, not looking at her. Out there in the snow. You asked why we helped. You said because Ruth told you to. That's part of it. He was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, I was in a place called Crow's Bend. Flood came through fast, no warning. I saw a woman trying to save a child. Clara's heart began to pound. She was holding him above the water, reaching for anything solid, and the current was pulling them both under. Daniel's voice had gone flat, the way a man's voice goes when he's reciting a nightmare he can't forget. I went in after them, got to her just as the water tore him out of her arms. She was screaming, reaching, and I had to choose, save her, or go after the boy. He stopped. The fire crackled. I saved her, pulled her to shore while she fought me, clawed at me, begged me to let her go back in. By the time I could look for the child, he was gone. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room had narrowed to just his voice and the memory it unlocked. That woman, she whispered. What happened to her? Don't know. I heard her husband blamed her for the boy's death. Heard she ended up somewhere in Colorado, but I never... He finally looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Your eyes. What? In the flood. The woman's eyes. They were gray like storm clouds. He leaned forward slightly. Like yours. Clara's hand found her throat, pressing against the pulse that hammered there. That woman was me, she breathed. That flood. That boy. His name was James. Daniel Cole went very still. The fire? Clara continued, the words spilling out now like water breaking a dam. There was no fire. That's what I told people because I couldn't say I lost him in water. I couldn't admit that water took my baby, and I couldn't hold on tight enough. She was crying again, but these tears were different. These tears had been locked inside her for months, frozen like the rest of her, and now they were finally breaking free. I held him, she sobbed. I held him so tight, but the current was so strong, and my hands the rope burns. They're not from today. They're from the flood. From trying to grab a branch, trying to hold him, trying... And then Daniel Cole was there, kneeling beside her bed, his hands covering hers, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that anchored her to the present moment. Listen to me, he said, his voice rough but steady. I was there. I saw it. You held that boy longer than any human being should have been able to. The water didn't take him because you let go. The water took him because God or fate or whatever you want to call it decided it was his time. And I have carried the guilt of not saving him for 5 years, so if you want to hate someone for that day, hate me. You tried to help us. I failed. Clara looked at this man, this stranger who wasn't a stranger at all, who had pulled her from death twice now, years apart in 2 different forms of cold, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not healing, but a crack in the wall she'd built around her grief. A crack that let in just a sliver of light. Ruth said something, Clara whispered, about James. She said he told her to tell me it wasn't my fault, that I could stop carrying it. Daniel's hands tightened on hers. Ruth sees things others don't. I don't pretend to understand it, but I've learned to trust it. How can she know about James? How can she possibly? I don't know. But whatever gift she's got, it's real. And if she says your boy is at peace, then I believe her. Clara wanted to believe too. Wanted it so desperately that the wanting itself felt like another kind of wound. I can't stay here, she said, even as exhaustion pulled at her. The Judge Blackwood, if he finds out you're sheltering me, let me worry about Blackwood. He wants your land. He'll use me against you. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. He's been wanting this land for years. If it wasn't you, it'd be something else. Man like that always finds a reason. You don't know what I am, what they say about me. I know what I see, Daniel replied simply. A woman who fought to save her child, a woman who survived when they meant for her to die. That's not a curse, Clara. That's strength. Clara closed her eyes, overwhelmed by his words, by the warmth of his hands on hers, by the impossibility of everything that had happened in the span of a single day. Rest now, Daniel said, releasing her hands and rising to his feet. Tomorrow, the world will still be there, and we'll face it then. But tonight you're safe, you're warm, and you're not alone. He returned to his chair by the fire, settling back into his watchful position. Clara let her eyes drift closed, listening to the wind outside, the crackle of the flames, the steady presence of the man who had tried to save her son 5 years ago and had somehow found her again. The last thing she thought before sleep claimed her was that Ruth had been right. She had been coming to this place, to these people all along. She just hadn't known it until now. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of small feet padding across wooden floorboards. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The warmth was unfamiliar. The softness of the bed beneath her foreign after months of sleeping on hay and frozen ground. Then she remembered. The snow. The rope. The twins running toward her like angels in 2 big coats. She opened her eyes to find Lily standing beside the bed, watching her with that careful, knowing gaze that seemed too old for her 7 years. You slept a long time, Lily said. Uncle Daniel was worried, but Ruth said you just needed to catch up on all the sleeping you missed. Clara tried to sit up and winced. Every muscle in her body ached, and her wrists. She looked down at them, seeing for the first time the extent of the damage. The rope burns had been cleaned and wrapped in white cloth, but she could feel the raw skin beneath. Ruth did that, Lily explained, following her gaze. She's good at fixing people. Mama taught her before well. Before. Where is Ruth? Outside helping Uncle Daniel with the animals. She sent me in to watch you. Lily climbed onto the edge of the bed with practiced carefulness, her movements economical in a way that reminded Clara of what Ruth had said about her heart. She said to tell you there's porridge on the stove if you're hungry. Clara's stomach answered before she could a loud, undignified growl that made Lily giggle. Guess that's a yes, the girl said. Can you walk? I can bring it to you if you can't. I can walk. Clara swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her weight on the floor. Her feet were swollen and tender, wrapped in the same white cloth as her wrists, but they held her. She stood slowly, one hand on the bed frame for balance. "The nightgown," she said, looking down at the soft blue cotton. "Ruth said it was your mother's." Lily nodded, her expression flickering with something complicated. "Mama made it the summer before we were born. She was good at sewing. Ruth got that from her. I got the weak heart." "That's not all you got," Clara said gently. "You got her kindness too. Running out into that storm to help a stranger, that takes a good heart, weak or not." Lily's face brightened, and for a moment she looked exactly like what she was, a little girl, starving for approval. "Uncle Daniel says the same thing," she admitted. "But sometimes I think he just says it to make me feel better about being the sick one. Maybe he says it because it's true." They made their way to the small kitchen area, Lily hovering close as if ready to catch Clara should she stumble. The cabin was modest, but well kept, a main room, with the hearth and kitchen, 2 small bedrooms off to the side, everything worn but clean. Clara settled into a chair at the rough-hewn table, while Lily fetched the porridge. The girl moved around the kitchen with ease, clearly accustomed to helping, despite her condition. "How long have you lived here with your uncle?" Clara asked. "Since we were babies. Uncle Daniel came and got us right after Mama died. Papa was supposed to take care of us, but—" Lily shrugged, a gesture too cynical for her age. "He left. Ruth says he was scared of us, of what we might be." "What you might be?" Lily set a bowl of porridge in front of Clara, then climbed into the chair across from her. "Ruth has dreams that come true. I feel things other people can't. Papa said it was devil's work. Uncle Daniel says it's just a different way of seeing." Clara thought of Ruth's words the night before, about the dream of a woman in the snow, about James telling her to deliver a message. Devil's work, or a gift, she couldn't say. But she'd felt the truth in it, the impossible rightness of a child knowing things she couldn't possibly know. "What do you feel?" Clara asked. "About me?" Lily considered this seriously, tilting her head in a way that reminded Clara painfully of James when he was thinking hard about something. "Sad," Lily finally said. "So much sad it's like a color around you. Gray and heavy." She paused. "But there's something else underneath. Something that wants to grow but doesn't have room yet." Clara set down her spoon, appetite suddenly gone. "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Ruth's the one who understands things. I just feel them." The cabin door opened, letting in a blast of cold air and 2 snow-dusted figures. Ruth stamped her feet on the mat, shedding powder like a small dog after a bath, while Daniel moved past her to hang his coat by the door. "You're up," Daniel said, his blue-gray eyes taking in Clara's position at the table, the barely touched porridge, the tension in her shoulders. "How do you feel?" "Alive," Clara answered honestly. "Which is more than I expected." "Ruth, get yourself and your sister some breakfast. I need to talk to Mrs." He caught himself. To Clara, alone. The twins exchanged a look that Clara was beginning to recognize, that silent communication of children who'd learned to read each other before they could read words. "Come on, Lily," Ruth said. "We can eat in our room." "But I want to—" "Lily." The smaller twin sighed, but followed her sister without further protest. The door to their bedroom clicked shut, leaving Clara and Daniel in a silence that felt heavier than it should. Daniel sat down across from her in the same chair Lily had occupied. Up close in the gray morning light, Clara could see the exhaustion etched into his features. He hadn't slept, she realized. He'd sat up all night watching over her. "The sheriff came by this morning," he said without preamble. "Tom Bassett, looking for you." Clara's heart seized. "What did you tell him?" "Told him I hadn't seen any woman fitting your description. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove otherwise." Daniel's jaw tightened. "He also told me Judge Blackwood's planning to call a town meeting. Wants to discuss what he calls the vagrant problem." "I should go," Clara said immediately, "before they connect me to you, before I bring trouble." "You're not going anywhere." The firmness in his voice stopped her mid-rise from the chair. "Sit down." Daniel continued, his tone softer now. "Please, let me finish." Clara sat. Judge Blackwood's been trying to force me off this land for 2 years, Daniel explained. First, it was the taxes suddenly tripled for no reason. Then it was the water rights claimed my creek was diverting from town supply, which is nonsense. Now it's the girls. His hands curled into fists on the table. Last month he started talking about how 2 little girls shouldn't be raised by a bachelor. Said it wasn't proper. Said he was concerned for their welfare. He wants to take them from you. He wants this land. The girls are just leverage. Daniel met her eyes. So you see, Clara, you didn't bring trouble here. Trouble was already waiting. If anything, you've given me another reason to fight. Clara didn't understand. How a married man with a wife has a stronger claim to guardianship than a bachelor. That's what Blackwood's counting on, that I'll stay single, stay vulnerable. But if I had a wife... No. Clara pushed back from the table. No, you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything, not yet. Daniel held up his hands. I'm just explaining the situation. You needed to know what you walked into. Clara's mind was racing. You took me in knowing it would make things worse with Blackwood, knowing he'd use me against you. I took you in because my nieces ran into a blizzard screaming that someone needed help. I took you in because when I saw you in that snow, I recognized you, not your face, but your eyes. Those gray eyes that I've seen in my nightmares for 5 years. Daniel's voice dropped. I took you in because I couldn't save your son, and maybe this was God giving me a second chance to do something right. Clara sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. You don't owe me anything, she said. What happened at Crow's Bend? You tried. That's more than anyone else did. I could have tried harder. You would have died. Maybe. Daniel shrugged as if his own death would have been an acceptable price. Or maybe I could have saved him. I'll never know, and that not knowing is what keeps me up at night. They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 people bound by a tragedy neither could escape. What happens now? Clara finally asked. Now you heal. You rest. You let those girls fuss over you because God knows they need someone to fuss over. A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. And when you're strong enough, we figure out the next step. Together. Together. The word felt foreign in Clara's mouth, a language she'd forgotten how to speak. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Be part of a family, accept help. I've been alone so long. You weren't always alone. You had a husband once, a son. And I lost them both. Walter left me, James. She couldn't finish. You didn't lose them the same way, Daniel said quietly. One chose to leave. One was taken. There's a difference. Clara looked at him, really looked, seeing not just the weathered rancher who'd pulled her from the snow, but the man beneath. The grief he carried. The burden of choices made in impossible moments. You blame yourself, she said. For James. All this time you've been blaming yourself. Someone had to. No. Clara reached across the table, her bandaged hand covering his. No, they didn't. That's what I'm learning, Daniel. The blaming has to stop somewhere, or it eats you alive. Daniel stared at their hands. Hers pale and wounded, his rough and work-hardened, and something shifted in his expression. Something guarded giving way to something raw. Ruth says you're supposed to be here, he said. She says James told her you'd come and that everything would make sense once you did. He looked up. Do you believe that... I don't know what I believe anymore, but I'm here, and for the first time in months I don't want to die. Clara swallowed hard. That has to count for something. The bedroom door creaked open and Ruth's face appeared in the gap. Uncle Daniel, there's a rider coming up the road. Daniel was on his feet, instantly moving to the window. Clara watched his back stiffen, his hand dropping instinctively to where a gun would hang if he were wearing one. Who is it? She asked. Can't tell yet. Ruth, take your sister to the back room. Don't come out until I say. But, now Ruth. The girl disappeared, and Clara heard the shuffle of small feet retreating deeper into the cabin. She rose from the table, ignoring the protest of her battered body. I should hide, she said. If it's the sheriff. Too late. He's already seen the smoke from the chimney. Daniel grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. They stepped onto the porch together, the cold hitting Clara like a physical blow. She hadn't realized how warm the cabin had been until she left it. Her bare feet screamed against the frozen boards, but she forced herself to stay still, stay silent, stay invisible. The rider approached slowly, picking his way through the deep snow. As he drew closer, Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that horse, knew that coat, knew the way he sat in the saddle, stiff-backed and self-important. No, she breathed. Daniel glanced at her. You know him. It's Walter. The name tasted like ash. My husband. Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. You said he left you. He did, 6 months ago. Clara's voice had gone hollow. What is he doing here? The rider. Walter pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard. He looked the same as the day he'd walked out. Clara noted with numb detachment. Same dark hair, same handsome face, same expression of mild disappointment that he wore, like other men wore hats. Clara, he called, as if greeting her at a church social instead of confronting her at a stranger's homestead. I've been looking everywhere for you. You have not. The words came out before she could stop them, sharp and bitter. You left me with nothing. You didn't look at all. Walter dismounted with practiced grace, approaching the porch with his hands raised in a gesture of peace that Clara didn't believe for a second. I made a mistake, he said. I was grieving. I said things I didn't mean. You told me it was my fault our son died. I was wrong. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and her approaching husband. That's close enough, Mr. Morgan. Walter stopped, his eyes flickering to Daniel with cool assessment. And you are? The man whose property you're standing on. The man whose rifle is currently pointed at your chest. Daniel's voice was flat dangerous. I suggest you state your business and leave. Walter's mask of contrition slipped slightly, revealing something harder beneath. My business is with my wife. I ain't your wife, Clara spat. You made that clear when you abandoned me. We never divorced. In the eyes of God and the law, you're still mine. The word mine sent a chill down Clara's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. What do you want, Walter, really? He smiled, and it was the smile she remembered from their courtship, the one that had made her think he was charming instead of calculating. I want to bring you home, Clara. I've been in Silver Creek for 3 days talking to people, asking questions. They told me what happened, how they drove you out, left you to freeze. His expression shifted to something approximating sympathy. That was wrong. Cruel. But you have to understand you weren't well. The things you were saying about James, about seeing him, hearing him, people got scared. Clara felt Daniel tense beside her. I never said those things. I never told anyone. You told me. Walter's voice was gentle, patient, the way you'd speak to a confused child. In your letters. Don't you remember? I never wrote you any letters. I didn't know where you were. Clara. He shook his head sadly. This is what I mean. Your memory, your grip on reality, it's fragile. You need help. Professional help. I've made arrangements. She doesn't need your arrangements, Daniel cut in. She's doing fine right here. Walter's attention shifted to Daniel fully, and Clara saw the assessment in his eyes, measuring, calculating, finding an angle. And who exactly are you to my wife? Walter asked, his tone loaded with implication. A friend. A friend who takes in strange women and lets them sleep in his cabin. Walter's smile turned ugly. How generous. Clara felt shame burn through her, hot and unwanted. The implication was clear. The damage to her reputation, what little was left, would be devastating. That's enough. Daniel raised the rifle slightly. You've said your piece. Now get off my land. I'll go. Walter held up his hands again, backing toward his horse. But this isn't over, Clara. The Judge Blackwood, he's a friend of the family. He's concerned about your welfare, about the kind of people you're associating with. His eyes swept the modest cabin with obvious contempt. He's prepared to help, to intervene if necessary. I don't want his help. That's the thing about help, darling. Sometimes we need it whether we want it or not. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, gathering the reins with gloved hands. I'll be at the hotel in town, he called down to her. When you come to your senses, when you remember who you are and what you owe me, you know where to find me. He turned the horse and rode away without waiting for a response, leaving a wake of churned snow and unanswered questions. Clara didn't realize she was shaking until Daniel's hand closed around her arm. Inside, he said. Now. They returned to the warmth of the cabin, but Clara couldn't stop trembling. She sank into a chair by the hearth, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold her pieces together by force. What did he mean? Daniel asked, kneeling before her. About letters, about the judge. I don't know. I never wrote him letters. I didn't know where he went. And Blackwood... Clara shook her head. I never met Judge Blackwood until yesterday when he ordered them to drag me out of town. But Walter seems to think you did. Walter thinks a lot of things that aren't true. He's good at making people believe his version of events. Clara's laugh was hollow. He convinced an entire town I was cursed. He probably convinced them I was crazy too. Daniel was quiet for a moment. This changes things. I know. I should leave. If Walter's working with Blackwood. That's not what I meant. Daniel stood pacing to the window and back. If Walter's working with Blackwood, it means this was never just about you. They're planning something bigger. I don't understand. Think about it, Clara. Your husband abandons you 6 months ago. Suddenly you end up in the same town where I live, the man who tried to save your son. A town where the judge has been trying to steal my land. And now Walter shows up claiming he wants you back, claiming you wrote him letters. Daniel shook his head. That's not coincidence. That's a trap. The door to the girls' room opened, and Ruth emerged, her face pale but determined. He's lying, she announced. The man who was just here. He's lying about everything. Ruth, I told you to stay. I know what you told me, but this is important. Ruth crossed to Clara, taking her bandaged hands in her small ones. I saw him in my dream too. Not the same dream as you, but another one. He was standing next to the judge and they were laughing. They were laughing about a lady crying, and the judge said... She scrunched her face, trying to remember exactly. He said, once we have the land, we'll have no more use for either of them. Clara's blood went cold. Either of them? You and Uncle Daniel. Ruth's grip tightened. They want to hurt you both. I don't know why, but I know it's true. Daniel crouched down to Ruth's level. When did you have this dream? Last night, while you were sitting with her. Ruth's eyes were shining with tears she refused to shed. I was going to tell you this morning, but then the sheriff came, and then... It's okay. Daniel pulled his niece into a hug. You told us. That's what matters. Over Ruth's head, his eyes met Clara's. She saw her own fear reflected there, but also something else. Determination. Resolve. We need to find out what they're really after, Clara said. Why my husband would work with a man who's trying to steal your land. Agreed. Daniel released Ruth, straightening up. But carefully. Walter knows you're here now. Blackwood will know by sundown. What do we do? For now we stay put. Let them make the next move. Daniel's jaw set in a hard line. But when they do, we'll be ready. Lily appeared in the doorway, her face anxious. Uncle Daniel, is the bad man gone? He's gone, sweetheart. Is he coming back? Daniel and Clara exchanged a look over the children's heads. The answer was obvious to them both, but neither wanted to say it aloud. "Come here, both of you," Daniel said, gathering his nieces close. "There are some things we need to talk about. Things that might be scary, but that you need to know." He led them to the hearth, settling into the big chair with Lily on his lap, and Ruth pressed against his side. Clara remained at the table, watching this man with his borrowed daughters, seeing the fierce protectiveness in every line of his body. "The man who came today," Daniel began carefully. "He's Clara's husband, her former husband." "He's mean," Lily said with certainty. "I could feel it." "Yes, he is, and he's working with Judge Blackwood, the man who wants to take our land." "Why?" Ruth asked. "I don't know yet, but I think they're going to try to make trouble for us. For all of us." Ruth considered this with unnerving calm. "What kind of trouble?" "The legal kind. The dangerous kind." Daniel tightened his arms around them. "I need you both to promise me something. If anything happens, if those men come back, if they try to take you anywhere you run, you hide. You don't trust anyone except Clara and Mrs. Price." "Mrs. Price," Clara interjected. "The midwife." "Adeline Price delivered these girls," Daniel explained. "She was their mother's friend, maybe her only friend. If something happens to me, she'll know what to do." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Ruth said fiercely. "I won't let it. Some things even you can't see coming, sweetheart." "I saw Clara coming. I saw the bad man coming." Ruth's chin lifted stubbornly. "If something bad was going to happen to you, I'd know. And I don't. Not yet." The qualifier "not yet" hung in the air like a threat. "Ruth," Clara spoke gently, drawing the girls' attention. "What exactly did you see in your dream about me, about the bad man, about all of it?" Ruth disentangled herself from her uncle and crossed to Clara, her small face solemn. "I saw you in the snow almost dead. I saw us finding you, bringing you here. I saw the bad man coming, and I saw him lying." She paused, her brow furrowing. "And I saw something else. Something that hasn't happened yet." "What?" "Water." Ruth's voice dropped to a whisper. "Lots of water, rushing and angry. And you were there, Clara. You were standing in it, reaching for something." Her eyes met Clara's, and in them Clara saw something ancient, something that shouldn't exist in a child's gaze. Reaching for someone. Clara's breath caught. The flood. The memory she couldn't escape. Was it past or future that Ruth had seen? "I don't know what it means," Ruth admitted. "But I know it's important. I know you're supposed to be here when it happens." "When what happens?" Ruth shook her head, frustration evident. "I don't know. The dreams don't explain themselves. They just are." Daniel rose, setting Lily on her feet. "That's enough for now. Ruth, why don't you and your sister show Clara around the place? She needs to know the land if she's going to be staying." "In this cold?" Clara protested. "With my feet still? There are boots by the door. Marjorie's. They should fit." Daniel's tone brooked no argument. "Fresh air will do you good, and I need to think." Clara understood. He needed to plan, to strategize, to figure out how to protect them all from enemies who seemed to multiply by the hour. She let the girls lead her to the door, let them bundle her into a coat that smelled faintly of lavender Marjorie's like everything else, and boots that fit almost perfectly. Outside, the world was white and silent, the storm having passed in the night, leaving behind a crystalline landscape that looked almost peaceful. Almost. "That's the barn," Lily pointed. "And over there's the chicken coop. And down that way is the creek, but Uncle Daniel says we can't go there alone because the ice is tricky." The creek. Water. Clara shivered despite the layers. "Are you cold?" Ruth asked, concern evident. "No, Clara stopped, seeing something in Ruth's eyes, knowing. "You feel it too, don't you? Something about the water." Ruth nodded slowly. "It's important, but I don't know why yet." She took Clara's hand, her small fingers surprisingly warm. "Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. You know that, right? Clara looked at this strange gifted child who had seen her coming in dreams, who claimed to carry messages from the dead, who spoke of water and reaching with the certainty of prophecy. I'm starting to, she admitted. I'm starting to. They walked together through the snow, the widow who had been left to die, and the two little girls who had refused to let her. Behind them in the cabin, Daniel Cole sat alone with a rifle across his knees and a war on his horizon. And somewhere in Silver Creek, two men with dark intentions were planning their next move, unaware that the woman they'd tried to destroy was still breathing, still fighting, still very much alive. The winter had only just begun. 3 days passed without incident, and Clara began to wonder if Walter had given up. She knew better, of course. Walter never gave up on anything he considered his property. But the silence allowed her wounds to heal, her strength to return, and something else to grow. Something fragile and unexpected. She was standing at the stove stirring a pot of stew when Lily tugged at her skirt. "You're humming," the girl observed. Clara stopped, not realizing she'd been making any sound at all. "Was I? Mama used to hum when she cooked too." Lily climbed onto a chair, resting her chin on her hands. "Ruth says it means you're starting to feel safe." Safe. The word felt like a foreign language, something Clara had forgotten how to speak. But standing in this warm kitchen with a child watching her with trusting eyes, she almost believed it was possible. "Maybe I am," she admitted. "A little." The cabin door opened, and Daniel entered with Ruth at his heels, both of them dusted with snow and carrying armloads of firewood. Over the past days, Clara had watched him work chopping wood, tending animals, repairing a section of fence the wind had damaged, and she'd noticed how he never complained, never rested, never stopped moving, as if stillness might let the grief catch up with him. "Smells good in here," he said, setting the wood beside the hearth. "Clara made stew," Lily announced proudly, as if she'd had something to do with it. And she was humming. Daniel's eyes met Clara's across the room, and something warm flickered in their depths. "That's so. Apparently." Clara ducked her head, suddenly self-conscious. "It's almost ready. Ruth, can you set the table?" They moved around each other with an ease that surprised Clara, passing plates, pouring water, settling into chairs that had somehow become assigned without discussion. Daniel at the head, Clara beside him, the twins across from them. Like a family. "Mrs. Price is coming tomorrow," Daniel said, as they ate. "I sent word 3 days ago. She wants to check on your hands, make sure they're healing proper." Clara looked down at her wrists, the bandages now clean, but thinner as the wounds began to close. "She doesn't need to make a trip all the way out here for me. She wanted to. Said she'd been meaning to visit anyway." Daniel paused. "She also said she has information about the judge, about what he's really after." Clara's spoon stilled halfway to her mouth. "What kind of information?" "Didn't say. Only that it was important." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And that we should be careful who we trust in the meantime." After dinner, once the twins were settled in their room, Lily asleep almost immediately, Ruth reading by candlelight, Clara and Daniel sat by the hearth as had become their habit. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said quietly. "Ask." "The girl's mother, Marjorie, what was she like?" Daniel was silent for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "She was sunshine. That's what I always thought. Even when everything was dark, Marjorie found a way to make light." He stared into the flames. "She was younger than me by 5 years. Our parents died when she was 12, and I raised her best I could. Wasn't good enough probably, but she never complained." "How did she meet the girl's father?" "His name was Henry Dawes. He came through town selling medicines, patent remedies mostly worthless, but he had a way about him. Charming, smooth." Daniel's expression hardened. Marjorie fell for him hard. They were married within a month. "And then?" Then he found out about her gift. Daniel turned to look at Clara. Marjorie saw things same as Ruth does now, dreams that came true, feelings about people that always turned out right. Henry thought it was romantic at first, called her his mystic bride. But after she got pregnant, after she started having visions about the birth, about what it would cost her, he stopped, his hands curling into fists on his knees. He got scared, Clara finished softly. Terrified. Started talking about demons and witchcraft. Said the babies would be cursed. By the time Marjorie went into labor, he'd already packed his bags. Daniel's voice was hollow. He left before Ruth was even born. Didn't know Lily got stuck, didn't know his wife was bleeding out while some midwife fought to save her children. Didn't care. Clara reached out, placing her hand over his fist. He startled at the contact, but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," she said. "For Marjorie, for you, for those girls who never knew their mother." The girls know her, Ruth especially. Daniel's fist slowly uncurled beneath her palm. She talks about Marjorie like she's still here. Sometimes I think she might be. You believe that the dead can stay with us. Daniel turned his hand over his fingers, threading through hers. The intimacy of it made Clara's breath catch. I didn't used to, he admitted. But after what Ruth's shown me, after the things she knows that she couldn't possibly know. He shook his head. There's more to this world than what we can see, Clara. I'm certain of that now. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, watching the fire burn low. Clara thought about James, about the possibility that he was somewhere still watching over her. The idea had once seemed like madness, the desperate fantasy of a grieving mother. But here in this place, with these people, it felt almost possible. Daniel, she said quietly. Why haven't you asked me about James, about what really happened? You told me. The flood, the water. I told you part of it. Clara took a deep breath. Walter, my husband, he wasn't there when the flood hit. He was supposed to be watching James while I went to the market. But when I came back, the water was already rising, and Walter was running toward the high ground, alone. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened. He left our son in the house. Just left him there. Clara's voice cracked. I went back. I found James in his crib, crying, the water already up to my knees. I grabbed him, held him as tight as I could, and tried to make it to higher ground. But the current... You don't have to, Daniel said gently. I need to. I've never told anyone the whole truth. Clara forced herself to continue. The current took us both. I was holding James above my head, trying to keep him out of the water when I saw you. You were on the bank already, and up to your waist, reaching for us. And then the water surged, and I lost him. I felt his little body slip through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't try to stop them. You saved me, she whispered. You pulled me out while I was screaming, fighting, begging you to let me go back in. And afterward, when I told Walter what happened, he said if I'd been there, if I'd been watching instead of running errands, our son would still be alive. That's not true. Isn't it? Clara laughed bitterly. If I'd been home, I would have seen the water rising sooner. I would have had more time. You would have died, Daniel cut in harshly. The way the water came and the speed of it, if you'd been in that house when it started, you both would have drowned. Walter knew that. That's why he ran. Clara stared at him. What? He knew. Daniel's voice was flat with certainty. I talked to people afterward, trying to understand what happened. Your neighbor told me she saw Walter leaving the house at a dead run before the worst of it hit. He knew the flood was coming, Clara. He knew, and he left James behind. The words hit her like physical blows. No, he wouldn't. He would. He did. Daniel's hand cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. Your husband is a coward. He left his own son to die, and then he blamed you for it because he couldn't face what he'd done. Everything that's happened to you since the town turning on you, The accusations being left to freeze in the snow, that's all because Walter Morgan needed someone else to carry his guilt. Clara was shaking now, her whole body trembling with a rage she'd never allowed herself to feel. "He blamed me," she said, her voice rising. "He let everyone believe I was responsible. He destroyed me." "Yes, he did. And now he's here, working with the judge, trying to—" She stopped, a terrible realization dawning. "He's not here to take me back, is he? He doesn't want me at all." "No," Daniel agreed grimly. "I don't think he does." "Then why? What does he gain?" Before Daniel could answer, a soft voice came from the doorway. "He's scared of what you know." They turned to find Ruth, standing there in her nightgown, her small face pale in the firelight. "Ruth." Daniel released Clara's hand. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." The girl padded toward them, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "I had another dream. About the bad man, Clara's husband. He was talking to the judge, and they were angry. The judge said the plan was taking too long. The husband said—" Ruth frowned, concentrating. "He said something about papers. About making sure Clara couldn't testify." "Testify about what?" Clara asked. "I don't know. They didn't say." Ruth climbed into Daniel's lap, curling against his chest like a much younger child. But they were scared, Uncle Daniel. Underneath the angry, they were really scared. Of Clara. Of what she might remember. Clara's mind was racing. Papers. Testimony. What could she possibly know that would threaten men like Walter and Judge Blackwood? "The flood," she said slowly. "Walter was gone for 2 days before it happened. Said he had business in the next town. But when he came back—" She stopped, a memory surfacing. "He had mud on his boots. The wrong kind of mud. There was no rain in the next town that week. I remember because I asked him about it." "Where do you think he was?" Daniel asked. "I don't know. At the time I assumed he'd been drinking somewhere, lying about business to save face, but now—" Clara shook her head. "None of this makes sense. What does any of it have to do with your land?" Ruth stirred against Daniel's chest. "Water," she murmured sleepily. "It's always about the water." The next morning, Mrs. Adeline Price arrived with the sunrise. She was older than Clara had expected, silver-haired and weathered, with hands that looked capable of both delivering babies and breaking bones. Her eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing as she took in the cabin, the children, and Clara herself. "So you're the one Ruth dreamed about," she said without preamble. "Let me see those hands." Clara held out her wrists obediently, while Mrs. Price unwrapped the bandages with practiced efficiency. "Healing well," the midwife pronounced. "No infection. Your lucky rope burns like these can turn ugly fast." She glanced up at Clara. "But then I suspect luck has very little to do with anything that happens around here." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Price rewrapped the wrists with fresh cloth, her movements gentle despite her brusque manner. "I mean that Ruth Cole has her mother's gift, and that gift doesn't make mistakes. If she dreamed you coming, it's because you're meant to be here. Simple as that." "You believe in her dreams, the visions." "I delivered that child into the world with my own 2 hands, Mrs. Price replied. Felt the power in her before she took her first breath. Marjorie was the same, knew things, saw things, understood the world in ways the rest of us can't. She sat back studying Clara with unnerving intensity. "Question is, Mrs. Morgan, what do you understand?" "I don't follow." "Ruth says you saw your sister's ghost before you came here. She says your boy speaks through her." Mrs. Price's gaze never wavered. "That means you've got thin blood too. Might not be as strong as the Cole gift, but it's there. You feel things others don't. You know things you shouldn't." Clara thought about it the moment in the snow when she'd seen Sarah's form, the way she'd felt James's presence in this cabin, the connection she'd sensed with Ruth from the very first moment. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I don't understand it, any of it." "Understanding comes with time." Mrs. Price rose, brushing off her skirts. Now, Daniel said you wanted to know about the judge, about what he's really after. Daniel had been standing by the window, keeping watch as he'd done since Walter's visit. At Mrs. Price's words, he turned. You have information. I have more than information. I have truth. The midwife's expression darkened. Judge Blackwood came to Silver Creek 5 years ago, right after the flood at Crow's Bend. Bought up half the damaged properties for pennies on the dollar. Made himself a fortune off other people's tragedy. I remember the flood, Clara said softly. We lived near Crow's Bend before... She stopped. Before you lost your boy. Yes. Mrs. Price nodded. And do you know why that flood happened? Why the dam broke when it did? They said it was heavy rains. The dam was old, couldn't handle the pressure. That's the official story. But there were witnesses, people who saw men at the dam the night before. Men with picks and shovels weakening the structure. Mrs. Price's voice went cold. Men paid by someone who knew exactly which properties would be destroyed and had buyers lined up before the water even receded. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. You're saying someone caused the flood deliberately. I'm saying Judge Silas Blackwood made a fortune that year, and he didn't make it by accident. Daniel stepped forward. Do you have proof? I have statements from witnesses who've since gone missing or turned up dead. I have records of property sales that don't add up. And I have... Mrs. Price hesitated. I have a letter. Written by one of the men who was there that night. He sent it to me 3 years ago, right before he disappeared. Wanted someone to know the truth in case something happened to him. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Clara demanded. What authorities? The sheriff's in Blackwood's pocket, the county marshal's his cousin, and the territorial judge? Mrs. Price laughed bitterly. Well, that's Blackwood himself, isn't it? The man controls everything around here. Anyone who's tried to expose him has ended up ruined or dead. But the letter is hidden somewhere safe, and it names Mrs. Morgan, names including your husband's. Clara sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. Walter was part of it, she breathed. The flood, the dam, my son. Your husband helped weaken that dam in exchange for a cut of the profits. Mrs. Price's voice was almost gentle now. He didn't know you'd be there when it broke. Didn't know your boy would be in that house? But he knew what was coming and he ran. Left you both to face it alone. The room spun around Clara. Everything she'd believed about that day, about Walter's abandonment, about her own guilt, all of it shifting, rearranging itself into a picture so horrifying she could barely comprehend it. He killed our son. The words came out as a whisper. Walter killed James. Not directly. But yes. Mrs. Price knelt before her, taking Clara's hands in her weathered grip. And now he's here because Blackwood's afraid. You were at Crow's Bend. You might have seen something, heard something that could connect them to what happened. With you alive and talking with your memory intact, they can't be sure their secret stays buried. That's why he's calling me crazy, Clara realized. That's why he told everyone I was mentally unstable. If I tried to testify against them, no one would believe a mad woman. Exactly. Daniel moved to Clara's side, his hand on her shoulder. What about my land? Where does that fit in? Mrs. Price stood slowly, her old joints protesting. Your land sits on the largest underground water source in the territory. Blackwood knows it. He's had surveyors out here secretly for years. If he controls that water, he controls everything, every farm, every ranch, every settlement for 50 miles. The springs, Daniel said. He's after the springs. He's after an empire, and you're standing in his way. Ruth appeared in the doorway, Lily behind her. The older twin's face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. They're coming, she said. I saw it just now. The judge and Clara's husband and other men. They're coming today. Mrs. Price moved immediately. How many men? 6, maybe 7. They have guns. Ruth's voice trembled. They're going to try to take us away. All of us. Daniel was already reaching for his rifle. How long? An hour. Maybe less. Mrs. Price grabbed her coat. I'll ride to the Hendricks place. Tom Hendricks owes me for saving his wife's life twice over. He'll bring men. There's no time, Daniel protested. Then you'll have to hold them off until help arrives. The midwife was already at the door. Stall them. Use the law, remind them they need warrants, proper procedures. Blackwood likes to pretend he's legitimate. Make him prove it. She was gone before anyone could argue, the sound of her horse's hooves quickly fading into the distance. Daniel turned to Clara. Take the girls. Hide them in the root cellar behind the cabin. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe. No. Clara stood, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm not hiding while you face them alone. Clara. Walter wants me. Blackwood's afraid of me. If I hide, they'll tear this place apart looking. But if I'm here standing with you, maybe we can make them talk. Make them reveal something. That's too dangerous. So is letting them separate us. Clara moved to him, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. Ruth said I'm supposed to be here. That I'm important somehow. Let me be important. Let me fight. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring in his blue-gray eyes. Then his hands came up to cover hers. The girls hide, he said finally. That's not negotiable. Agreed. And you stay behind me. No matter what they say, no matter what Walter tries, you don't let them separate us. I won't. Ruth stepped forward, her small face set with determination. I'm not hiding either. Ruth, Daniel began. I can help. I can feel what they're planning, know when they're lying. That's useful. It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous. Ruth lifted her chin, looking so much like Daniel in that moment that Clara's heart ached. Mama died having us. You almost died saving us. Clara almost died in the snow. But we're all still here, still fighting. I want to fight too. Lily tugged at her sister's sleeve. Ruth, I'm scared. Ruth's expression softened. She turned to her twin, taking both of Lily's hands in hers. I know. That's why you're going to hide, okay? Hide and stay safe and keep your heart calm. I'll come get you when it's over. Promise? Promise. Clara watched the twins say goodbye, Lily disappearing into the root cellar with a blanket and a candle. Ruth returning to stand between the adults with her jaw set and her eyes too old for her 7 years, and felt something crystallize inside her. This family had saved her, had taken her in when she had nothing, believed in her when no one else would. Now it was time to return the favor. They're close, Ruth said quietly. I can feel them. Daniel moved to the window, rifle in hand. Clara took position by the door, her heart pounding but her hands steady. And then, in the distance, she heard them horses approaching, men's voices carrying on the cold air. The storm had arrived. The riders came slowly, spreading out as they approached the cabin like wolves circling wounded prey. Clara counted 7 men, Judge Blackwood at the center, Walter slightly behind him, and 5 others whose faces she didn't recognize, but whose purpose was clear from the guns at their hips. Daniel stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely at his side. Clara moved to stand beside him, and Ruth pressed close to her skirt, small but unafraid. That's far enough, Blackwood, Daniel called out. The judge raised a gloved hand, bringing the riders to a halt. His smile was cold, practiced, the smile of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Mr. Cole, I'm here on official business. No need for hostility. Official business requires proper documentation. You got a warrant? Blackwood's smile tightened. I have authority, which is all I need. Not on my land, you don't. Walter urged his horse forward, and Clara felt her stomach clench at the sight of him. He looked confident, almost smug, as if this confrontation was merely a formality before an inevitable victory. Clara, he said, his voice carrying that false warmth she'd once mistaken for love. "Please, this has gone on long enough. Come home with me. We can work things out." "I have no home with you." "You're confused. That's understandable, given everything you've been through." Walter's eyes flickered to Daniel, then back to her. "But these people can't help you, not the way I can. These people saved my life. You left me to die. I didn't know what the town was planning. When I heard what they'd done..." "You're lying." Ruth's voice cut through the winter air, clear and certain. "I can feel it. Everything you say is a lie." Walter's expression shifted, something ugly flickering beneath the surface. "Control your brat Cole. She ain't mine to control, and she ain't wrong." Judge Blackwood edged his horse closer, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This is a waste of time. Cole, I'm giving you one chance to hand over the woman voluntarily. She's wanted for questioning regarding property damage in Silver Creek." "What property damage?" "The general store. Someone set fire to it 2 nights ago. Witnesses saw a woman matching Mrs. Morgan's description fleeing the scene." Clara's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I haven't left this cabin in days." "Witnesses say otherwise." Blackwood's smile returned sharper now. "And given your history of mental instability, your word doesn't carry much weight." "What witnesses?" Daniel demanded. "Name them." "That information will be revealed at the proper time." The judge gestured to his men. "Now, either she comes with us willingly, or we take her by force. Your choice, Cole." Daniel raised his rifle, the click of the hammer pulling back echoing across the yard. "Try it and see what happens." The men shifted nervously, hands moving toward their weapons. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. "You can't shoot all of us," Blackwood observed calmly. "And even if you could, you'd hang for it. Is this woman really worth your life, your niece's futures?" "She's worth a hell of a lot more than yours." Walter laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Listen to yourself, Cole. You've known this woman for what, a week, and you're ready to die for her. Or maybe..." His eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. "Maybe it's not just chivalry. Maybe there's something else going on here." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "There's nothing..." "Don't bother denying it. I can see it in how you stand together, how you look at each other." Walter's voice dripped with contempt. "My wife warming another man's bed while our son's barely cold in the ground." "Don't you dare!" Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare speak of James. You have no right. Not after what you did." "What I did, I wasn't the one who let him drown. No, you were the one who caused the flood." The words hung in the air like smoke. Walter's face went pale, then red, his composure cracking. "What did you say?" "I know the truth now, Walter." Clara's voice grew stronger. "I know about the dam, about the men with picks and shovels, about the deal you made with Blackwood to destroy Crow's Bend so he could buy up the land." "That's insane. You're raving." "Am I? Then why did you come back with the wrong kind of mud on your boots? Why did you run before the water even reached our house?" Clara was advancing now. Her fear transformed into fury. "You knew, Walter. You knew the flood was coming and you left our son to die." "She's delusional," Walter said quickly, turning to Blackwood. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Her mind..." "Is perfectly sound," Ruth interrupted. "And she's telling the truth. I can feel it." The girl stepped forward, her eyes locked on Walter with an intensity that made him shrink back in his saddle. "You dream about it, don't you, the water? The screaming? You hear a little boy crying for his mama, and you can't make it stop." Walter's face had gone white as the snow around them. "How you can't possibly? I see lots of things. I see you breaking that dam. I see you counting money while bodies floated in the streets. I see..." Ruth's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly in the still air. "I see James, And he's not crying anymore. He's angry. Shut up. Walter's hand went to his pistol. Shut that child up, or I swear to God. You'll what? Daniel's rifle came up smoothly. Draw on a 7-year-old. Go ahead. Give me a reason. Everyone calm down. Blackwood's voice cut through the rising chaos, but Clara could hear the strain beneath his composure. This is getting out of hand. Is it? Clara turned to face him. Or is it getting too close to the truth for your comfort, Judge? I'm sure the territorial marshal would be very interested in hearing about your involvement in the Crow's Bend disaster. All those deaths, all that property conveniently available for purchase afterward. You have no proof of anything. Don't I? Clara smiled, though her heart was pounding. Mrs. Price has a letter, written by one of your own men. Names, dates, details, everything needed to see you both hang. It was a gamble. Clara had no idea if Mrs. Price's letter contained enough evidence to truly threaten them. But the way Blackwood's face changed told her the shot had landed. You're bluffing. Try me. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment, calculation warring with fury in his eyes. Then he turned to his men. Search the cabin. Find that letter. Like hell, Daniel snarled. The men started forward, and everything happened at once. Daniel fired not at anyone, but into the air, and the horses spooked, throwing 2 of the riders. Ruth screamed something that might have been a warning, and Clara felt herself being grabbed from behind. Walter had dismounted without anyone noticing. His arms locked around her like iron bands, dragging her backward. Let go of me. Shut up! His breath was hot against her ear. You've said enough. Daniel spun, rifle leveling at Walter, but he couldn't shoot without risking Clara. The other men had recovered their guns drawn and pointed at the cabin. Drop it, Cole, Blackwood commanded. Drop it, or we start with the girl. One of the men had Ruth by the arm, lifting her off her feet as she kicked and struggled. Clara saw Daniel's face go white. Let them go, he said, his voice barely controlled. Let them both go, and we can talk. The time for talking is over. Blackwood dismounted, approaching Daniel with slow, deliberate steps. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over the deed to this property. Mrs. Morgan is going to accompany us back to town, where she'll be committed to an asylum for the criminally insane. And those children are going to be placed in proper custody somewhere they can't spread their mother's poison anymore. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. Clara felt Walter's grip tighten as she struggled. His hand pressed against her throat, not quite choking, but threatening. Stop fighting, he hissed. You've already lost. I haven't lost anything. You took everything from me years ago. I tried to give you a good life, a respectable life, and you threw it away. You murdered our son. The words seemed to break something in Walter. His grip shifted, becoming less like restraint and more like violence. James died because you weren't there, he snarled. Because you were out buying ribbons and flour while our house filled with water. If anyone murdered him, it was you. I know the truth now. I know you sabotaged that dam. I know you ran while James was still in his crib. Clara's voice cracked with grief and rage. He was crying for me, Walter. Our baby was crying for his mama, and you left him there to drown. Shut up. He was 3 years old. He couldn't even reach the door handle. He was trapped, and you knew it, and you ran anyway because money mattered more to you than your own child. Walter's hand closed around her throat, cutting off her words. Clara clawed at his arm, gasping for air, but he was too strong. Spots danced in her vision. I said, shut up. The gunshot split the air. Walter's grip suddenly released, and Clara fell forward, gasping and choking. Behind her, she heard a thud, a scream, chaos erupting around her. She turned to see Walter on the ground, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. Standing over him, a smoking pistol in her weathered hand, was Mrs. Adeline Price. Always knew you were rotten, Walter Morgan, the midwife said calmly. Just needed you to prove it in front of witnesses. Behind her, a dozen men on horseback were spreading through the yard, farmers and ranchers Clara didn't recognize, but whose grim expressions spoke of purpose. Tom Hendricks. Blackwood's voice had lost its composure. What is the meaning of this? A man near the front of the group, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face like weathered leather, edged his horse forward. Meaning is simple, Judge. Mrs. Price here told us some interesting stories on the ride over. Stories about Crow's Bend, about what really happened to that dam. His eyes swept the scene, Walter bleeding in the snow, Clara gasping for breath, Ruth still held by one of Blackwood's men. Then we ride up to find your boys threatening women and children. Seems to me like those stories might be true. This is official county business. County business doesn't include choking women half to death. Hendricks nodded to his men. Let the girl go, now. The man holding Ruth hesitated, looking to Blackwood for guidance. The judge's face had gone gray with the realization that his control was slipping. Do as he says, Blackwood ordered through clenched teeth. Ruth was released. She ran immediately to Daniel, who gathered her close with his free arm, his rifle still trained on the judge. Clara pushed herself to her feet, one hand at her bruised throat. Mrs. Price was beside her in an instant, steadying her. You all right, child? Clara nodded, unable to speak, yet her eyes fixed on Walter. He was still on the ground, moaning about his shoulder, looking smaller, somehow diminished, pathetic. This was the man she'd married, the man she'd thought she loved, the man who had destroyed everything. It's over, Blackwood, Hendricks said. Mrs. Price has agreed to share that letter with the territorial authorities. By this time next week, there'll be marshals crawling all over this county. You think a letter from a dead man will hold up in court? I think it'll hold up enough to warrant an investigation. And I think once people start talking, really talking, a lot more evidence is going to come to light. Hendricks's voice hardened. Crow's Bend killed 37 people, Judge. 37, including children. You think folks are going to stay quiet once they find out it wasn't an accident? Blackwood's remaining men were shifting uneasily, some already backing their horses away. The calculation in the judge's eyes was rapidly shifting from confidence to survival. This isn't finished, he said finally, his voice cold with promised retribution. No, it ain't, but for today it is. Hendricks gestured with his rifle. Take your boys and your pet murderer there and get off Cole's land. And Judge, don't come back. Next time we won't be so civilized about it. For a long moment, Blackwood didn't move. Clara could see him weighing his options, calculating risks, searching for an angle. Then with a sharp gesture to his men, he turned his horse and rode away without another word. Two of his men hauled Walter to his feet. Clara's former husband looked at her one last time, and in his eyes, she saw something she'd never seen there before. Fear. Real fear. The fear of a man who knows his secrets are no longer safe. This isn't over, Clara, he said, echoing the judge's threat. You don't know what you've started. I know exactly what I've started. Clara's voice was raw from his hands on her throat, but steady. The truth. And the truth has a way of coming out, Walter, no matter how deep you bury it. They dragged him away, and Clara watched until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did her legs give out. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. His arms went around her strong and warm, holding her up when she couldn't hold herself. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. Clara buried her face against his chest, and the tears came, not the frozen, silent tears of grief she'd grown accustomed to, but deep, racking sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for James, for the mother she should have been, for the years of guilt she'd carried, that had never been hers to bear. She cried for the woman she'd been before the flood, and the woman she'd become after, broken, blamed, abandoned. And through it all, Daniel held her. Let it out, Ruth said softly, her small hand patting Clara's back. Let it all out. You've been carrying it too long. How long they stood there, Clara couldn't say. Eventually, the sobs subsided into hiccups, then into shaky breaths, then into something almost like calm. "We should get inside," Mrs. Price said practically. "That throat of yours needs tending." Clara allowed herself to be guided toward the cabin, Daniel's arm still around her waist. At the door, she stopped. "Lily," she croaked. "She's still in the root cellar." "I'll get her." Ruth was already running toward the back of the cabin. Inside, Clara sank into a chair by the hearth while Mrs. Price examined her throat with gentle, knowing hands. "Bruising, but nothing permanent," the midwife pronounced. "You'll be sore for a few days, no permanent damage." "Thank you." Clara met the older woman's eyes. "For coming back, for everything." Mrs. Price's weathered face softened. "I've been waiting 15 years for someone brave enough to stand up to Silas Blackwood. Couldn't let you do it alone." The door burst open and Lily flew in, Ruth close behind. The smaller twin threw herself at Clara, wrapping her arms around Clara's waist with desperate strength. "I heard the gunshot," Lily sobbed. I thought, I'm okay." Clara stroked the child's hair, her throat aching with more than physical pain. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Everyone's okay. The bad man, gone. He's gone." Lily looked up, her face tear-streaked, but hopeful. "For good." Clara glanced at Daniel, who had been speaking quietly with Tom Hendricks by the door. He met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the truth. This wasn't over. Blackwood would regroup. Walter would seek revenge. The danger hadn't passed. It had only been postponed. But that wasn't what Lily needed to hear. Not now. "For now," Clara said. "He's gone for now, and we're going to make sure he can't hurt anyone ever again." Hendricks approached, hat in hand, his expression respectful. "Mrs. Morgan, I owe you an apology. My wife, she was from Crowsbend originally, lost her brother in the flood. If what Mrs. Price says is true, if those men deliberately—" He stopped, struggling with emotions too big for words. "It's true," Clara said softly. "I wish it wasn't, but it is. Then we'll see them pay for it, every last one of them." Hendricks nodded firmly. "I've sent a rider to the territorial capital. There'll be marshals here within the week. Until then, I'm leaving men posted around your property. Anyone approaches who shouldn't, they'll know about it." "Thank you," Daniel said. "I won't forget this." "Don't thank me. Thank your lady here. Took more courage than most men have to stand up like she did." Hendricks tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, you ever need anything, you send word. The Hendricks family pays its debts." After he left, the cabin fell quiet. Mrs. Price busied herself making tea while Ruth and Lily settled on the floor near the fire, exhaustion finally catching up with them. Daniel sat down heavily across from Clara, his face lined with weariness. "You could have been killed," he said quietly. "When Walter grabbed you, but I wasn't." If Mrs. Price had been a minute later, she wasn't. Clara reached across the table, taking his hand. "I'm here, Daniel. I'm alive. And for the first time in years, I feel like I might actually stay that way." His fingers intertwined with hers, holding tight. "I thought I was going to lose you. When he had his hands around your throat, I thought—" His voice broke. "You've already lost too much. I know." Clara squeezed his hand. "So have I. But maybe that's why we found each other. Because we know what it costs, what it means." Daniel looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. The walls he'd built around himself, walls she recognized because she had matching ones, seemed to thin just slightly. "Ruth said you were coming," he murmured. "That night in the storm. She said someone was coming who needed us." He paused. "She didn't say we might need you too." "Uncle Daniel." Ruth's voice came drowsily from the floor. "You should tell her." Clara frowned. "Tell me what—" Daniel shot his niece a look that was half exasperation, half gratitude. Ruth just smiled sleepily and closed her eyes. "I was going to wait," Daniel said, "until things were settled, until we knew you were safe." "Tell me." He took a deep breath. There's a preacher in the next town over. Man named Reverend Collins. He owes me a favor from a few years back." Daniel's eyes met hers steadily. "If you were willing, he could marry us. Legal and proper. No more of Blackwood claiming you're a vagrant. No more of Walter saying you're his property." Clara's heart stopped. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. Not because of the danger or the legal protection or any of that." Daniel's voice dropped. "I'm asking because in the week you've been here, you've become family. To the girls. To me. And I know it's fast. I know it doesn't make sense by any normal reckoning, but nothing about this has been normal." Clara thought about her first marriage. The excitement, the hope, the gradual erosion of both as she learned who Walter really was. She'd sworn she'd never put herself in that position again, never give a man that kind of power over her. But Daniel wasn't Walter. Daniel had pulled her from floods and from snow. Daniel had defended her against guns and accusations. Daniel looked at her like she mattered not as property, not as obligation, but as a person worth protecting. "The girls," she said slowly. "They'd be mine, legally, officially, if you wanted them to be." Clara looked at Ruth and Lily curled together on the floor, already asleep. These children who had dreamed her coming, who had run into a blizzard to save her, who had filled the hollow place in her heart where James used to live. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Daniel's face transformed, the weight lifting the walls, crumbling, something like joy breaking through the exhaustion. "You're sure? After everything today?" "I'm sure." Clara smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt real. "I'm sure because of everything today. Because you didn't run. Because you stood your ground even when it cost you. Because that's the kind of man I want standing beside me." Mrs. Price appeared with cups of tea, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes twinkling with something knowing. "About time," she said simply, setting the cups down. "Marjorie would have approved." "You think so?" "Child Marjorie told me before she died, told me clear as day that someone was coming for her girls, someone with gray eyes and a broken heart." Mrs. Price looked at Clara. "She said the broken heart would be what saved them, that it would make room for new love to grow." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different. These were tears of hope. "She saw me," Clara whispered, "before I even knew this place existed." "The women in this family have always seen more than most." Mrs. Price patted Clara's hand. "And now you're going to be one of them." That night, after Mrs. Price had gone and the children were properly in bed, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch watching the stars emerge through breaks in the clouds. The cold didn't seem to bite as hard now, or maybe it was just that Clara had finally found warmth worth holding on to. "It won't be easy," Daniel said quietly. "Blackwood will try again. Walter, too. And even with the marshals coming, justice moves slow out here." "I know. There's going to be a trial, probably. You'll have to testify. Tell them everything about Crow's Bend, about James, about what Walter did." "I know. And the townspeople, some of them won't change their minds about you just because the truth comes out. Some of them—" "Daniel." Clara turned to face him. "I've survived being abandoned. I've survived being blamed for my son's death. I've survived being dragged through snow and left to freeze." She took his hand. "I can survive whatever comes next, as long as I'm not doing it alone." He pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "You're not alone," he promised. "Never again." Above them the stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to the small drama playing out below. But Clara didn't need the stars to care. She had something better now, a home, a family, a future worth fighting for. And she would fight for it, with everything she had. The door creaked behind them, and Ruth appeared in her nightgown, yawning. "Can't sleep," she announced, climbing onto Daniel's lap. "Too much happened today." "Yeah, it did." Daniel adjusted to make room for her. "Big day tomorrow, too." "I know. Clara's gonna be our new mama." Ruth said it matter-of-factly, as if it had already been decided long before this moment. I told Lily. She cried happy tears. Clara felt her own eyes sting. What about you? How do you feel about it? Ruth considered this seriously, the way she considered everything. I've been waiting for you my whole life, she finally said. Now you're here. Feelings don't really matter when something's meant to be. Clara pulled the child into her arms, holding her close. They matter to me, she whispered. They'll always matter to me. Ruth nestled against her, and Clara felt Daniel's arm tighten around them both. 3 people, 4 counting Lily sleeping inside, bound together by loss and hope and something that might be love. The night stretched on cold and quiet, but inside the circle of their embrace, there was warmth enough to last until spring. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small cabin that had become Clara's salvation. Reverend Collins arrived at dawn, a kind-faced man with silver hair and steady hands that had married hundreds of couples across the territory. He asked no questions about the bruises still visible on Clara's throat, or the armed men posted around the property. He simply did what he'd come to do. Ruth and Lily stood as witnesses, both dressed in their Sunday best dresses that had once belonged to their mother, carefully altered by Clara's hands to fit their growing bodies. Mrs. Price sat in the corner, her weathered face soft with something that might have been tears. Do you, Daniel Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Morgan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at Daniel. This quiet, steady man, who had pulled her from death twice over, who had defended her when no one else would, who had offered her not just shelter, but a place to belong. I do, the Reverend smiled. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel kissed her gentle brief, a promise rather than a proclamation, and Clara felt something shift inside her. The last remnants of Clara Morgan, the cursed widow, the abandoned wife, fell away like snow melting in spring sun. In her place stood Clara Cole, wife, mother, survivor. Does this mean you're our mama now? Lily asked, her small face alight with hope. For real and forever. Clara knelt, gathering both girls into her arms. For real and forever. Ruth hugged her tight, then pulled back with that knowing look Clara had come to recognize. Mama Marjorie is happy, she said softly. I can feel her smiling. Good. Clara kissed her forehead. I hope I can make you both as happy as she would have. You already do. The days that followed were a strange mixture of peace and tension. The marshals arrived as promised, 3 hard-eyed men who listened to Mrs. Price's evidence with growing fury and took statements from everyone involved. They rode to Silver Creek to arrest Judge Blackwood, only to find he'd fled in the night, taking Walter Morgan with him. They won't get far, Marshal Harrison assured them, his voice grim with determination. We've sent word to every town within 200 miles. They're wanted men now. Justice will catch up to them. Clara nodded, though part of her wondered if justice was even possible for men like Blackwood and Walter. They'd destroyed so many lives, caused so much pain. Could anything truly balance those scales? It's enough that people know the truth now. Daniel said that evening, reading her thoughts, as he'd become uncannily good at doing. Crow's Bend will be remembered proper. The victims will be honored. That matters. Does it bring them back? No, but it stops them from being forgotten. He took her hand across the table. And it stops the men responsible from hurting anyone else. 2 weeks after the wedding, word came that Walter had been captured trying to cross into Mexico. He'd been shot resisting arrest and wasn't expected to survive his injuries. Clara waited to feel something: satisfaction, relief, grief for the man she'd once loved. Instead, she felt only a strange emptiness, like a door closing on a room she'd already left behind. You okay? Daniel asked when she told him the news. I don't know. I thought I'd feel more. He was my husband once, the father of my son. He was also the man who let your son die, and then blamed you for it. You don't owe him your grief, Clara. I know. She struggled to find the words. I keep thinking about who he was when I married him, who I thought he was. I loved that man. And finding out he never really existed, that the person I mourned when he left me was just a mask. She shook her head. It makes me wonder if I ever knew anything true at all. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know what's true now. You know this family, these girls, this life we're building. He cupped her face in his rough hands. You know me. Do I? Better than anyone ever has. And I know you better than you think. I know you're scared that this will turn out to be another mask, that one day you'll wake up and find out I'm not who you thought I was. His eyes held hers steadily. But I'm not Walter, Clara. I'm just a man who got lucky enough to find you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that. Clara leaned into his touch, letting his certainty anchor her. I believe you, she whispered. I'm trying to believe you. That's enough for now. Judge Blackwood was captured a month later hiding out in a mining town in Nevada. Unlike Walter, he survived to stand trial. A trial that became the talk of the territory as witness after witness came forward with stories of corruption, bribery, and murder. Clara testified on the third day. She sat in the witness stand and told the truth about everything about Crow's Bend, about the flood, about James. She spoke of Walter's betrayal of Blackwood's schemes, of the townspeople who had dragged her through the snow and left her to die. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge, a stern-faced man from the territorial capital, had to clear his throat before speaking. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Your testimony has been illuminating. Clara stepped down from the stand and walked past Blackwood's table. The once powerful judge looked diminished, now gray-faced, defeated, stripped of the authority he'd wielded like a weapon for so long. It was worth it, she told him quietly, so only he could hear. Everything you did, everything you took, it was worth it to see you like this. Blackwood said nothing, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, finally showed something human. Fear. The verdict came down a week later. Guilty on all counts. Blackwood was sentenced to hang. Those who'd helped him received lengthy prison terms. The properties he'd stolen were returned to their rightful owners, or their descendants. Crow's Bend. The town he'd destroyed was officially recognized as a site of mass murder rather than natural disaster. It's over, Daniel said when the news reached them. Really over this time. Clara stood on the porch of their cabin watching Ruth and Lily play in the spring sunshine. The snow had finally melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers that painted the hills in colors she'd forgotten existed. Is it strange that I don't feel different? She asked. I thought when justice finally came something would change inside me. But I feel the same. Because the change already happened. Daniel came to stand beside her. The day those girls found you in the snow. The day you decided to stay. The day you let yourself hope again. He wrapped an arm around her waist. Justice is just the world catching up to where you already are. Clara leaned into him, watching her daughters chase each other through the meadow. I still think about him, she admitted quietly. James, every day. That's not going to stop. Shouldn't stop. But it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. The guilt. She paused, searching for words. It's like I was carrying a weight I didn't know I was carrying. And now that I've put it down, I can finally feel how heavy it was. You know it wasn't your fault. I know it here. Clara touched her head. I'm still learning to know it here. She moved her hand to her heart. But I'm getting there. Every day I'm getting there. Ruth suddenly looked up from her play, her face brightening with that knowing expression Clara had come to love. She came running toward the porch, leaving Lily to chase after her. Mama Clara, he's here. Clara frowned. Who's here? James. He's been here all morning watching. Ruth pointed toward the meadow, toward empty air that somehow didn't feel empty at all. He's happy now. He wanted me to tell you. Clara's breath caught. She looked where Ruth pointed and saw nothing, just grass and flowers and sunshine. But she felt something, a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring air, a presence that seemed to wrap around her like a child's embrace. "Can you really see him?" she whispered. "Sometimes, when he wants me to." Ruth took Clara's hand. "He doesn't want you to be sad anymore. He says you're a good mama to us, to him. He says he's glad you found us." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling. "Tell him," her voice broke. "Tell him I love him, that I'll always love him, that not a day goes by that I don't think about him." Ruth was quiet for a moment, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she smiled. "He knows. He's always known." She squeezed Clara's hand. "He says goodbye isn't forever. He says he'll see you again someday, but not yet. Not for a long, long time." "I can wait," Clara whispered. "As long as I need to." The warmth intensified for just a moment, a sensation like small arms wrapping around her, a presence pressing close, and then it was gone, leaving behind only peace. A peace Clara had thought she'd never feel again. "He's gone now," Ruth said. "But he's not far. He's never far." Clara knelt and pulled Ruth into her arms, then reached for Lily, who had finally caught up, pulling her close too. "I love you both," she said fiercely. "More than I ever thought I could love again." "We know," Lily said, her small hand patting Clara's back. "We've always known." They stayed like that until Daniel joined them, wrapping his arms around all three of his girls, his wife, his nieces, his family. "What's all this?" he asked, though his voice was gentle. "Just saying goodbye," Clara answered. "And hello, both at the same time." He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't need to. He simply held them tighter and let the spring sunshine wash over them all. That evening, after the girls were in bed, and the cabin had settled into the quiet rhythms of nighttime, Clara sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand. She'd been putting off this task for weeks, but tonight felt right. "What are you writing?" Daniel asked, settling into the chair across from her. "A letter. To the families in Crow's Bend, the ones who lost people in the flood." Clara looked up. "I want them to know the truth. Not from newspapers or court transcripts, but from someone who was there. Someone who lost too." Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "That's a good thing you're doing." "It doesn't feel like enough. Nothing feels like enough. Sometimes all we can offer is our truth. Let people do what they will with it." Clara nodded slowly. Mrs. Price said something similar. She said the truth is like seeds. You plant them not knowing what will grow, but you plant them anyway because that's all you can do. Smart woman. She is. Clara looked around the cabin at the hearth where Ruth had first told her about James's message, at the bed where she'd recovered from near death, at the table where she'd first begun to feel like part of a family again. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For taking me in, for believing Ruth's dreams, for standing with me when it would have been easier to let them take me." Daniel's expression softened. "Easier isn't always better. Still, most men wouldn't have. Most men didn't pull you out of a flood 5 years ago and spend every night since dreaming about the boy they couldn't save." Daniel's voice was rough with old pain. "When Ruth told me someone was coming, someone who needed us, I didn't know it was you. But when I saw you in that snow, I knew." He stopped, struggling with words that came hard to him. "I knew I'd been given a second chance. A chance to do right by you. To do right by James." "You have." Clara turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his. "You've done more than right." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes only between people who truly understand each other. "What happens now?" Clara finally asked. "Now we live. We raise those girls. We work the land." Daniel shrugged. "We grow old together if we're lucky. That's all. That's everything." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That's more than I ever thought I'd have." Clara smiled a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and warmed her from the inside out. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll live, we'll grow old, and we'll be happy." "Will we?" "We will." Clara said it with certainty, with the kind of faith she'd thought she'd lost forever. "Because we've earned it. All of us." The candle on the table flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the spring night was alive with crickets and starlight and the promise of tomorrow. Clara picked up her pen again. She had a letter to write to the dead, to the living, to the future she was only beginning to imagine. But first she looked at her husband, at this man who had given her everything she'd thought was lost. "Daniel." "Yeah." "Thank you. For finding me. For keeping me." He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face into something beautiful. "You're the one who found us, Clara. We were just smart enough to hold on." She laughed, a sound she'd thought she'd forgotten how to make, and returned to her letter. The words came easier now, flowing onto the page, like water finding its way home. She wrote about loss and survival. About guilt that wasn't deserved, and justice too long delayed. About little girls who saw beyond the veil, and a quiet man who saved her twice over. About a son she would carry in her heart forever, and a life she was finally ready to live. And when she finished, she signed her name, Clara Cole, and felt the weight of it settle into her bones like a blessing. Outside, the stars burned bright and eternal. The creek murmured its endless song. The children slept safe and loved. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, a little boy with summer sky eyes smiled at his mother and was at peace. Clara Morgan had been left to die in the snow, abandoned by everyone who should have protected her. Clara Cole rose from those ashes, wife, mother, survivor, and built a life more beautiful than she ever dreamed possible. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with something better, with a woman who learned to carry her grief without being crushed by it, who found love in the most unexpected place, and who proved that even the most broken hearts can beat again. The cabin stood solid against the night. The family slept within its walls. And spring had finally come. Clara Cole was home.